we are talking today about something that's fitting to the month, November. Now, November is like the beginning of the end of the year. The days are getting shorter, the nights are longer, the weather gets more miserable, especially in Seattle, where it's just a little bit more cloudy and rainy, and yeah, you could call it depressing. And at the same time, it's also the time where I think the external stuff doesn't get so much attention, and we can actually go internal and spend a little time on introspection and reflection. November is also the time of remembering the dead. There is, for the Christian tradition, the All Saints and All Souls Day. There is November 11th, where we remember the fallens of the World War I and also other world wars. And in general, it's just a day or a month where how I grew up. We thought more about going to graves or getting the graves a little bit nicely ready for the winter. And so I thought it was fitting, for many reasons, to also talk about that topic that most of us want to avoid, and you may be tempted to turn off the dial and just switch the channel, but stay tuned. It's worth it. It's about death and dying. Now, do you feel like you spend any time thinking about your own mortality? Are you afraid of death? Are you afraid of dying? Well, if so, 20% of Americans are joining you in that fear. And it's something that's apparently more amongst women than men, which I think has much more to do that men just don't want to think about, and women are more likely to reflect on that and discuss it than just to push it aside. Now, interestingly, 20% are also afraid of public speaking. And I always remember this joke by Jerry Seinfeld that said that an average person, when they go to the funeral, feel probably more comfortable being in the casket than saying the eulogy. And I think there is something true to this, but this again has more to do with the fact that we may just not want to think about the topic of death. Now, the fear of death is something that I think makes us sometimes create healthy habits, right? So we are maybe thinking about, well, let's lose some weight or eat more vegetables. Let's have a colonoscopy once in a while just to make sure. So there are things that can drive us to just avoid that grim reaper. But in general, there is that idea of not wanting to think about it because it's bringing up all these emotions. It's a fear, it's maybe grief from someone that was dying. It's maybe all of those things that we don't know about death that makes us want to avoid it. But the problem when we are avoiding something that's inevitable, and that's certainly true, it is inevitable. We're gonna die, all of us. When we are avoiding something that's inevitable, just like the taxes, or maybe listening to the signs of our body that it needs attention, usually it backfires. And when it comes to the fear of death, how it can backfire is that that fear gets worse. And it's maybe a subconscious fear, something that just becomes more and more an issue that becomes in that subconscious realm bigger. And as we are getting older, may actually overshadow any kind of joy of still being alive. Now, when my parents were passing in 2010, even though professionally and also personally I was confronted with death, I got a kind of a new curiosity about it, a new sense of I need to really think about this topic, because as long as your parents are living, you think like, well, you are immortal. Life goes on forever, and all of a sudden they have expired, and then you are realizing, well, you're next. And so since ever then, I have been really trying to understand death more, or to get a different relationship to death and also understand the fear of death more. Now, the fear of death is certainly something some of my clients are coming with, simply because they feel that since ever they have this more unhealthy fear of dying, there is the more healthy way where you just feel like, okay, I keep it in the back of my mind. And as I said, there are some good outcomes from that. Also, the outcome that you don't necessarily go bungee jumping or hiking in the midst of a snowstorm, all of those things that make us more cautious. But the unhealthy fear of death is that fear that just encompasses every day, that makes us obsess about it, that makes us hypochondriacs, that makes us just always dread waking up in the morning. And what is that fear about? Well, there is a fear of the dying process. A lot of people are afraid of, well, what if it is painful? What if I struggle? What if it's hard? And then there is a fear of the unknown. A lot of people just feel, well, it maybe just lights out and over. Well, that doesn't feel very appealing. Or maybe I'm gonna go into eternal punishment because I wasn't really such a good person here on earth. Or maybe it's something that's really just incredibly boring and nothing actually happens. And I just gonna feel like withering away. There are a lot of those fears happening. Then there is a fear also of what happens with those that we leave behind. Especially parents are often concerned about their kids. How can they keep on going without me? Or partners and spouses wonder how they can leave their partner behind. Can they manage also their lives without our help? But in a study that the really wonderful Dr. Elizabeth Kübler-Ross has done, she was a Swiss physician, that she found that the greatest fear that we have is that fear of losing control. And it may be the all-encompassing fear about death in general, because usually we are so just comfortable in being in charge, feeling like, yeah, we can predict things, we can avoid things, we can be in control of our circumstances. But when it comes to death, when it comes to that idea that at one point we have to face it, no matter whether we want it or not, it becomes something that makes us feel easily powerless. And that is just some topic that feels, for many of us, so overwhelming that we want to avoid it. But I feel there is something really beautiful about death, something that actually is very creative, can give you something very positive in your life. And that is one aspect that allowed me to find more peace with death. And today, what I want to just talk about is how to make peace with death, how to be able to see death not as an enemy, but maybe more as a friend, maybe more as something that's a part of nature that we're gonna embrace and we're gonna just include in the love of life. Or just like the Steve Jobs quote, that is, no one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to get there. And yet death is a destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. And there are other ways death can be a change agent and actually improve our lives just by acknowledging its presence. So we will talk more about this after the break.